Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's session on supply chain risk management, fourth parties, and beyond. This is a really important topic as we become more integrated as a society, as networks become more integrated, and the risk grows in terms of third parties and the individuals they're dealing with. My name is Andrew Rigney. I am the Director of Cybersecurity Operations at NetJets. I'm really excited for today's talk, and I'm joined by two fantastic speakers. After our presentations, we will have a live follow-up question and answer session. If you have any questions during the talks today, please submit them in the Q&A box and I will get them to our panelists. Our first speaker today is Dr. Erdal Oskaya. Dr. Oskaya is a CISO, he's a teacher, and a prolific author. Today, Dr. Oskaya will discuss the evolving cybersecurity threat landscape, various adversaries and their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and how this is all related in affecting the global supply chain. Next, we'll be joined by Vanessa Jankowski. Ms. Jankowski is the Director of Product Management at BitSite, where she is focused on their third-party risk management offerings. Ms. Jankowski will present on the relationship between third and fourth party risks and provide some recommendations on how to take a zero trust approach to these issues. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Oskaya.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. And here's my session. Today, I'm going to talk about, of course, supply chain attacks and how it affects the cybersecurity landscape. You had the introduction. Currently, you should know that I work at Standard Chartered Bank as the Regional Chief Information Security Officer. And I got lots of books. You can always Google and find out about the books. And if you want to get connected with me in social media, this is all my social media channels. Please feel free to join. Surprise for today, if you tweet about this session and take a screenshot, share it at Twitter, you can win one of my books as ebook. Now, let's go to the session. As we all know, our world has changed. We are not in the same world anymore. COVID-19 changed everything. The way that we live, the way that we communicate, we call it the new normal. I mean, as I said, the way that we live, we try not to go to crowded places anymore. We don't shake hands anymore. We try to wear our masks. We try, to keep our social distance. No more sports game. Many things has been limited. Besides that, we started to work remotely. Besides that, we started to do conferences like this one remotely. Besides that, we changed the way we shop as well. So this brought many other risks with it. I mean, honestly, I used to work always remotely. It was not an issue for me. I used to love my Amazon and do remote shopping as well, but it affected many lives, many businesses, and cybersecurity. I would like to start with yourself. Quick question before we even start the session. Do you know what is running in your computer? Do you know how many apps do you have in your phones? Do you know what kinds of rights those apps have? I cannot hear. Some of you say yes, some of you say no. Like, do you know that Google collects up to 20 times more information than Apple? Do you know all this information will be somehow used against you? Just yesterday or before, Facebook leaked 500 million more data. I don't think so they did it intentionally, but cybersecurity is becoming more and more important. It's important to know what is running in your computer and who you give rights in your computer. It's like, don't you know who has access to your home? Don't you know who has the key? Like, I'm pretty sure your parents, if they live around, they have a backup key just in case you lose it or something urgent happens, or your good friends. If not, you have to call a professional to break the door for you or open the door for you. Same things applies to computer. Like, honestly, it's important to know because, look, you might have the latest and greatest technology, the latest security software such as Commodore or Microsoft or you name it. You might have a firewall, Palo Alto. You might have the best operating system, Windows 10 or Linux or Ubuntu. I really don't care. You have the latest and greatest encryption. But at the end, you have the human factor. There is two types of organizations. One, they know they've been hacked. Two, they don't. Going forward, there's going to be two types of organizations. One, they hire the right talent and build the cybersecurity strategy beforehand. Two, unfortunately, the ones that have to do it later. So why not do proactive engagement and do everything before you get hit? So is the future going to be sunny? What do we wait in 2021? I mean, to be able to predict the future, we have to look on what we did in the past. You have to look way back. And especially, I'm going to focus now, as this is a supply chain conference, in the top 5 supply chain risks. First of all, this is from the news. I'm pretty sure you remember Petya or the non-Petya attack, which happened 2017, 2018, I don't remember. It was one of the biggest supply chain attacks. Attacks started in IT supply chain, not via phishing or browsing. Hackers used different techniques, they were fast, and within 1 hour, they destroyed more than 60,000 computers. I repeat, 60,000 computers. And, we always say most of the attacks start with email. No, this time, the hackers or the nation states, they attacked a company called Medidoc, something like that. And they launched the attack through this. It was one of the biggest supply chain attacks shown. And unfortunately, it was a destructive attack. When I look in the news, this is screenshots from a few hours ago today. The SolarWinds attack. CSA Online had the news 1 day ago. Ransomware attack on EDR provider through supply chain 10 days ago. PHP suffered supply chain attack 6 days ago. Officials draw attention to supply chain threats 3 days ago. And this is the US. I can talk all day about it, but this is a moderations, I had the moderators watching the time. So let's go to things. I mean, you all understand by now what supply chain attack is, right? We are connected, we work remotely, we do things connected with other stuff. So there is businesses that adopt solution. Of course, they have to do the governance, the risk, the compliance, but more importantly, supply chain is basically the third-party attack where you get attacked, as in the non-party example, through your supply. So not email, not human error, or not. So you trust me to come to your house. I have your key. I am in your house. While I'm going out, I'm stealing the mobile phone that you forget at home. Is an example. Or I get a copy of the key and I let people use my swipe card, for example, to the bank to come in and steal some stuff. Of course, mainly supply chain attacks can be complicated, and this is from what I can see from the analysis that I do or read, they're backed up with nation states actors. I mean, one of the biggest one, SolarWinds attack. It is one of the most sophisticated attack ever seen. One of the world's biggest cybersecurity firm was hacked. And when you look at the root of the attack, it was through SolarWinds, and the password was SolarWinds 123, where hackers first used this chain to reach out to the vendor, which is FireEye, and any other company who was using SolarWinds. They are advanced, yes, but I'm not here to talk about the root cause, of course. But remember, I said there's going forward two types of organizations. One, they hire the right talent and build cybersecurity strategy. Unfortunately, it's obvious that SolarWinds did not hire the right talent, and company executive, the X1, was easily blaming intern for having passwords such as SolarWinds123 without thinking that he was the ultimate responsible person. So put this aside. There is 5 top risks. The first one is the human element, as I said. Unfortunately, this is not going away. As I said earlier, you might have the latest and greatest technology, but if you don't invest in your talents, in your humans, if you don't make them aware, they can be the weakest link. Social engineering. It is really important to train even your kids about, I mean, we all were trained. I think when I say kids, like when I was little, they used to tell me, hey, if a stranger gives you some lollies, don't accept, never go speak to strangers. And I think today we still recommend this to our kids. I mean, I wrote a whole book about it. You can definitely look later about it, or tweet about the session and ask this as your book that you win. 2, I mean, as I said, sometimes you see an email, it looks like harmless. This email, you click on the email, you open the email, but in reality, the hacker is gaining access through, for example, in this case, through reverse shell into your machine. 2, critical data. Supply chain attacks are known to steal sensitive data. Unless it's like NotPetya, to destroy you, they try to steal from you. And we have examples, the Airbus attack. Vaccine supply chain steal. They start to steal the COVID-19 formula. So it's important to work with the business as IT to identify and classify assets across the supply chain and design your security around protecting these crown jewels. You should know your low-hanging fruits. You should know what the assets are in your organization that's been needed or wanted by hackers. 3, third party. And unfortunately, there's still a very weak link. I just said a few seconds ago, why do you need to give third party access to your home? I mean, saying that using Windows or Apple or Android is also third party. I agree. But at least know your rights, know what you're sharing, know what they're taking of you as much as possible. This could be your payments, analytics, chatbots, your advertising. You have to keep in mind that a majority of the world's most visited websites have unsupervised third-party JavaScript integration. And unfortunately, they lack on security controls. You can, there is many different words. It doesn't have to be just JavaScript, right? But at the end, there is many different vectors which can help you to lose your information. Remember my example in the beginning? I said the weakest link being human, knowing what you're sharing. 4, lack of vendor risk management. Like, do you have a TPSA in process? Third-party security assessment, risk assessment. Your business cannot work with your supply chains, without your supply chains. But what kinds of supply chain risk assessment have you done? Are you keeping, like, if, let's say, one of your supply chain for your pen, where you buy your pens has been hacked, and you don't know about it, but this company who produced you the pen might have lots of information about you. Them getting hacked means your information is also leaked. So why not do a proper risk assessment with who you are working? Why not inform IT or security team, at least threat intel team, to look into these resources and help you to protect this, when I say resources, these third-party businesses, and help you to be informed. Look, you cannot control the security, but if they get hacked, at least you will know what kind of risk you have. 5, you can have information risk management in different ways. You can use ISO, you can use COVID, you can use different frameworks to secure yourself. But again, I don't want to talk today about this. 5, absence of your GRC. In other words, governance, risk, and compliance platform. You need to have risk management. As I said, it's like, when you have security cameras, if you have antivirus, you're watching what's happening in your building, or if you have antivirus, firewall, IDS, IPS, you're watching what's happening in your network. Having a GRC platform will help you to be aware. And by law, you have to put, at least in Australia, for example, we're watching you on CCTV, or beware of the dog. This is like letting them know that you are having some security control. Well, GRC platform, a single source of truth when it comes to managing and monitoring risk to supply chain. As I said, there is many different attack vectors, such as ransomware, or such as misconfiguration attacks. The important thing is here to know that all these attacks can be eliminated, or not eliminated fully maybe, but can be controlled by implementing the right strategies. And this is building a proper cybersecurity strategy. It is really, really important. And one other thing that you have to know, that you have to always have the assume breach mentality. You have to have the right tools to defeat your environment. Hackers, nation states are a step ahead, as I said. So you have to have the right tool set to be able to protect you. You should know your threat actors. If you're a banking business, you should know the threat actors. They like to be around banking and financial sector, such as Lazarus, such as, they created a big virus called Carbanak in 2015. 100 banks were hacked and more than $1 billion was stolen. So know your threat actors. Do a proper assessment, know your weakness. Knowing the threat actors will help you to build a cyber strategy. Knowing your weaknesses helps you to strengthen your defense. Know your technology. Knowing your technology will empower you. And finally, combining all of these together, knowing your threat actors together with your weaknesses and technology will master your defense. And this is the only way that you can secure yourself. With this, I would like to give the word back to the moderator. Thank you very much for listening. And of course, I'm going to be hanging around for the question and answers. Please don't forget to connect with me in social media. And I hope you enjoyed the session. Dear moderator, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Oskaya, for that great presentation. Next, I want to transition and introduce Ms. Jankowski, who will talk a little bit more about third-party and fourth-party risks.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I am so excited to be here and to talk with you about fourth parties, how they impact the risk environment, and some approaches for getting a better handle on this challenging extension of third-party risk management. Now, before we dive in, I'd like to first level set on the reality that we're faced with today. So more and more businesses are driving a strategy of profitability and growth that is increasingly reliant on an interconnected organization and an interconnected ecosystem. So businesses rely more and more on third parties to carry out critical functions of their business. And what this translates into is a scale problem for the teams who actually have to manage risk for the enterprise. You're no longer just at the mercy of your third parties, you're actually at the mercy of their third parties. And you can see real world examples of this phenomenon every day. So your fourth parties can create operational risk that tends to play out in a painful way. So it's not hard to imagine what the impact would be if this ship was working for one of your third parties responsible for delivering product and then got stuck in the Suez Canal. So even though there's not a direct relationship with the fourth party, they play a big role in your business's operations. And just recently, we saw another example where a subcontractor for one of the major coronavirus vaccine providers actually ruined 15 million doses of the vaccine, which of course has real impact on the businesses involved, the governments who are trying to pace through distribution, and the millions of people who are actually waiting for those vaccines. We also see this play out in cybersecurity, where attacks against a third party's vendor has major implications for your business. And as an organization's digital footprint expands, it is increasingly vulnerable to cyber threats. And cyber threats are the number one or number two risk domain cited by leaders across the globe. And that's not very surprising. This timeline starts out with Target's breach in 2013, which was the result of an attack on one of Target's third parties. And we're seeing events like Hafnium and SolarWinds play out as major supply chain incidents today. As the chain of custody for sensitive data or access to critical systems expands, the potential for impact does as well. And this dynamic risk is playing out in a way that is actually driving regulators to turn their focus to it. So we're seeing increased regulation focused on assuring that threats are properly addressed in industries like financial services and healthcare and critical infrastructure. So with the DORA regulation, for example, there's an attempt to harmonize the digital resilience requirements across EU member states, really to decrease cyber risk by increasing the oversight of risk and resilience measures by third-party ICT providers. And these dynamics are motivating the strongest businesses to diligently focus on how well aligned their practices are in order to keep up with the dynamic risk of the digital enterprise. There's an awareness that cyber risk management practices and approaches need to evolve in order to keep up, which is why we're all here today. But the flip side of this reality is that cybersecurity budgets are flat, right? They're increasingly either flat, or if they're growing at all, they're growing just incrementally. And so while cyber attacks are growing at a rapid pace and at exponential scale, the budget to help actually address this risk is flat. And the numbers bear that out too. And so I'm citing a few different studies here, but a quarter of organizations have no dedicated third-party risk management resources. And almost 50% have only 1 or 2 dedicated TPRM employees. This means we have very thin teams tasked with addressing third-party risk, not to mention fourth-party risk. While nearly 3/4 of businesses say that there's an urgent need to improve fourth-party assessment, only 25% are actually using technology to improve this process through workflow automation or better monitoring of third parties. And almost 80% say that their business is adopting technologies faster than they can actually address related security issues. And so what that results in is a question of not what is the risk or is there risk at all, but what is the risk management approach that can actually help us address the risk we're faced with. Now, the approach that I would advocate for is a move from trust but verify to zero trust. So put another way, this is a shift from trust but verify, like we had 10 or 15 years ago, to verify first, then trust. So the idea here is not that no one can be trusted or that third or fourth parties aren't acting with the best intent. The idea is that the state of risk is so dynamic and the risk itself is so great that objective and comprehensive visibility is really required in order to actually understand or manage the risk you're facing. Because the fact is that even when subjective data is good, it's not good enough. Most organizations are only able to do periodic assessments at best. So even when you're getting thorough and trustworthy information back from your vendor, your team is likely to be limited in capacity. So if you remember a minute ago, I said something like 75% of businesses have 0, 1, or 2 employees focused on third-party risk management. And so their ability to actually scale across the full ecosystem of third parties and fourth parties is unlikely. So a lot of these teams are really trying to get through this process, but maybe they can only go through the process in a really robust way for a small portion or a small subset of their vendors. Or maybe you're only able to pulse your third parties once a year. So you leave some exposure in that. But I suspect that none of this is new to this group. We're all aware of this increasingly dynamic risk. We're all aware of the thin resources we're working with. And frankly, third-party risk management is difficult enough. So how can we start to think about effective fourth-party risk management? Well, it's really all about the weakest link in your supply chain. Your weakest link may not be that top-tier critical vendor that you're already invested in. It's much more likely that the weakest link is found somewhere in your extended supply chain that's hard to see and hard to get to. And what that means is when something bad happens, like SolarWinds or Hafnium, for example, it can be a real challenge, not just to understand the risk proactively, but even to respond when there's an incident facing your organization. So what can we do about that? How do we actually start to solve some of that challenge? Well, we can start to look at a few foundational elements of a zero trust approach to establishing resilience. So there are three building blocks here. The first one is mutual accountability. And the idea here is that better security performance across the board, so across that whole extended ecosystem, that interconnected set of contributing parties here, higher performance across the board will be mutually beneficial. It will result in mutually assured resilience because everyone is pulling their weight. The other two pillars here are broad visibility and ongoing monitoring, and these go hand in hand. So from a broad visibility standpoint, organizations really need to have an ability to see across their supply chain, because this risk is evolving both in scale and in impact. And so in order for businesses to actually respond effectively, not to mention proactively manage risk, they have to be able to answer the question of, where is my weak link? Ongoing monitoring is also critical. We talked about subjective data not being good enough, even when it is really good. And that's because this risk is dynamic. And so your ability to understand your risk, understand how it's changing, understand where you need to focus, and understand where change is required, requires that you first see what's changing over time. And relationships with businesses and your third parties and their subcontractors and fourth parties is not static. So these things are changing. And so your ability to actually manage that risk proactively relies on an ongoing monitoring approach, as opposed to a periodic point in time perspective of risk. So if we take a minute to dive a little bit deeper into mutual accountability, we started this conversation with a map of your organization to your various third and fourth parties. The idea here is that when we raise the bar on security performance across the board, everyone benefits. So connected organizations will all do better if we are all accountable for strong performance. And so this takes stronger security performance for my own organization, a stronger third-party risk management program overall, stronger assessment standards, and so on. And if we can all live up to the higher standard, the better off we'll be. And so there are a few different bullet points on how you can get started going down this road of driving mutual accountability. But I'd really distill it down into two key concepts. The first one is verification. So again, the place we started here was moving from trust but verify to zero trust, or verify then trust. And so verification is the first step, making sure that you actually have a way to measure security performance of your own organization, but also of your third and fourth parties. Because if you don't know where there's a problem, you won't know where to focus. And once you can start to measure the performance of your organization and your whole ecosystem, you can actually start to manage it. The next concept here is shared expectations. And the idea here is really about this mutual accountability. If everyone has the same expectation of the thing that they're working toward and the level of performance that they're working toward, they can all start to manage it. And so as we share expectations with our third parties and with their third parties, there can be an implicit or explicit agreement about what's expected, right? We can start to share progress against this performance bar. And what that will do is, over time, as everyone starts to work toward that higher bar, the ecosystem will become more resilient and the supply chain risk will be reduced collectively. Now, before we switch gears to talking about the other two pillars of this zero trust approach, I would like to ask you a question about how you identify fourth parties today. What is your practice? Are you relying on third-party attestations? Are you asking only at the time of onboarding? Are you asking on an annual basis or semi-annual basis? Are you doing nothing at all? A related question is what approach you took in the wake of events like SolarWinds or Hafnium. Were you able to identify where SolarWinds, Orion, and vulnerable Microsoft Exchange servers existed across your supply chain? Were you able to sort of act quickly in response to questions from your board or from your executive team about how this was impacting your third-party and fourth-party ecosystem? Or were you sort of stuck and not able to do much at all? If the answer to either of those questions was that, we're not doing much at all, we don't ask about fourth parties, we're not aware of who our fourth parties are, you are not alone. Trust me. So only 2% of organizations actually do anything to identify and monitor all the subcontractors engaged by their third parties. Only 8% do this for their most critical relationships. And so even though there's really widespread acknowledgement that fourth party risk is a problem and that it represents a huge risk to the business and to the enterprise, there's not actually a lot of work going on yet to actively address it. I think part of this is because third-party risk management on its own is challenging enough. And third parties are really the gate to fourth party risk management and other layers of the extended supply chain. So if you don't have a good handle on some of those key questions for your third parties, it will be more and more difficult to actually get answers and get clarity on the state of your fourth party risk. But as we think about that, we get into the next key building blocks to this zero trust approach. So this is based on the notion that operational resilience hinges on the ability to see across your extended supply chain and respond to critical changes. And so again, if you can't see your weakest link, there's nothing you can do about it. And because cyber risk is so dynamic, it's not enough to get a picture of where things are on day one and not revisit for another 365 days. So as you think about how to achieve effective resilience at an enterprise level, I'd really start with making sure that you have a comprehensive monitoring program in place for third parties, which will put, again, because third parties are really the gate. So if you see here, they're really the gate to all of your fourth parties and all the layers that exist beyond that. And so being in a position to monitor them and understand where risk exists just within your third parties is a strong first step. And then from there, you're able to actually build out your understanding of fourth party risk, fourth party connections, concentration risk, and things that are getting in the way of operational resilience. As you build out, again, your monitoring program, your assessment process to make sure that it's capturing not just third party risk, but fourth party risk as well. So here, the starting point is about, again, establishing that monitoring program for third parties, making sure that you have an awareness of who your fourth parties are. As you start to establish visibility into those fourth parties, you can also start to build out some of that mutual accountability that we talked about, not just with your third parties, but also starting to share some of that expectation with their relationships with their subcontractors. So I think these are all really strong places to start as you think about building out a fourth party risk program and making sure that you're in a position to start thinking about some of these challenges of operational resilience and as it relates to fourth party cyber risk. Now, before we wrap up here, I'd like to leave you with a few key takeaways. The first is right where we started. So businesses are increasingly reliant on an interconnected ecosystem of third, fourth, and nth parties. This isn't going away. So as we see more and more shifts in business and more of a shift toward reliance on third parties to carry out key functions of our business, this scale problem is just going to continue to grow. And because of this growing and dynamic risk, there are changes happening to the environment that we operate in. So there's more pressure for enterprise risk and supply chain risk and third-party risk teams to actually understand and get a handle on proactive mitigation of fourth party and concentration risk. And so we see this in business. We also see this in the form of new regulation to help drive accountability on this front. And in order for businesses to really establish resilience, there needs to be a shift from trust but verify to verify then trust or zero trust, where there's a foundation of mutual accountability, broad visibility, and ongoing monitoring across the extended supply chain. None of these things are easy. Again, we talked about how third-party risk management is difficult enough, but building a strong foundation in these areas will really prepare you for strong risk management practices across the enterprise. So anyway, with that, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your attention, and I will turn it over to the moderator. Looking forward to questions and conversation soon.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Erdal. We're going to move into the Q&A session of our talk here. I don't see any questions that were put in the Q&A chat, so we can either do that, or I can kick it off with a couple questions. Unfortunately, Erdal won't be able to join us for the live portion of this, but it's going to be the Vanessa show, so we're going to be able to ask her a few questions. So just to kick it off, Vanessa, you did, one of the things that hit me was the conversation about limited resources. And this is something in my position at NetJets that we're running into. there is operational things we need to do. There is the day-to-day. And yes, we understand that third party is important, but now you're asking us to do fourth party, and that, and yes, we understand that third party is important, but now you're asking us to do sorry, I'm having some audio issues, but that fourth party is important. So could you discuss a little bit about what steps a company would take to address that?
Sure. And I think, as you said, a lot of it is a resource challenge. And so third-party risk on its own is a really difficult thing to do. And as I mentioned, there are so many places where the teams are just so lean and so thin to begin with that it's hard to think about how to do anything more than what they're already doing. And I think this is true for both third-party risk and fourth-party risk. A lot of it is about prioritization, because I think a lot of programs tend to take a one-size-fits-all where they're trying to do everything for every third party. And we wouldn't recommend an approach like that for fourth party, especially. I think a lot of it is about figuring out where, as Erdal said, where are the crown jewels, who are the critical vendors, who are the third parties that you are most reliant on, and what is the impact that you would expect if they had an outage or if they had a data leak, and then really trying to focus on those. So I think that's one of the big sort of layers on top of this notion of third and fourth party risk management. It's just priority, making sure that you have an awareness of where to focus, who is the most likely to cause you a problem if there is a data leak or if there's a data outage, whether it's for a third party or for a fourth party. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, and that's really helpful background. And another thing that struck me in the conversation was you were talking about DORA. What are there any other regions that are going through a similar process, or what do you think is the future of that type of regulation? I guess
so. DORA is the only one that I know of that's sort of that broad strokes, but I think we will see more of that in the future. I mean, I think there's just more and more events like Erdal spent a lot of time talking about SolarWinds. Super critical. I think it's top of mind for everyone. And so I think as in third-party risk, we saw regulation really start around financial services and banking. And I think you're going to see an evolution of that sort of regulation broaden as organizations and as governments and regulators sort of start to sort of wrap their heads around what is expected from businesses as they try to grapple with this kind of risk. But I think the challenge is that it's a lot of, it's about practically how do you actually apply different risk mitigation techniques. And I think that is half of the problem here, is that it's just not an easy thing to do. And so the regulation around it has to be clear enough that people understand what is being asked of them. I think even in some of the regulation that exists around continuous monitoring programs or monitoring programs generally, it doesn't really spell out what that means and what techniques and what sort of practical steps are required.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another piece that stuck out to me on the monitoring piece. And how do we actually make this from an semi-academic concept of, okay, we understand the outgrowth of these issues, but if I'm starting out and I have limited resources, and you're saying, one of the things you said is one of the key pieces is monitoring, right? How do you do that? How do you get started with your fourth party management journey?
Yeah, great question. And I think, again, a lot of it comes, and I think what I see from folks who use technologies like BitSight is that they start with their most critical vendors, which is a great place to start. I think it's also, there are limits to that because a lot of times your critical vendors are the place where you are already invested heavily. And so I think what monitoring programs and security rating solutions allow you to do is get a lot more scale a lot more quickly. So you can figure out, okay, where do I have pockets of dependency? Where do I have concentration risk? And so sort of relying on technologies like that can help you identify where your focus should be in a way that scales much more quickly than people, right? I think the people resources tend to be really thin. And so anytime you can apply a technology to help you make a process faster, help you scale across a broader part of your sort of ecosystem, it's productive. But even then you need to prioritize and say, here's where I expect there to be risk from an inherent risk standpoint, so I can focus. Because every time you make a decision about something you have to do, you're sort of implicitly saying, here are the things I'm not going to do. And so a lot of times the value that you get in terms of program efficiency and sort of risk visibility is about saying, I'm not going to focus here. And instead, I'm going to put my attention and my resources and my time in this other area. So it's good to be able to do that with confidence, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting when you discussed one of the ways to, triage that risk or prioritize is identifying the weakest link in your supply chain. And that, to be honest, is something that we are struggling with, because as I look at our vendors, which are everything from aviation companies to Brooks Brothers and food suppliers and everything in between, the first cut I did was, okay, let's look at the top 20 vendors in terms of, spend. And that's what we need to look at, because in my head, it's, well, if we're only, spending $50,000 a year on this vendor, what does it really matter? But and I think it was really interesting. It's, if you're looking at it, that third, fourth party, it doesn't matter as much about the spend. It matters about that company's security. So could you just talk a little bit more about how to, again, with the monitoring and some other processes, you're able to identify those weakest links, but any other suggestions or thoughts on that?
Sure. And I think it's an imperfect science. So there are probably lots of different approaches to take, but one of the things that's really critical is having sort of a shared understanding across your business about what is critical. And so some folks use spend, other folks will say, what is the relationship I have? Where is my data going? Who has access to my systems? And that's another way to say, here's my top tier. And from there, I can sort of understand the impact that might occur if there was an outage, if there was a data leak, and then really focus my fourth party attention on those relationships. The other way to think about it, just from a fourth party perspective, is seeing where you have concentration risk. So where do you have a lot of reliance on a single vendor or a lot of reliance on a single type of provider? And I think I was talking with someone a couple of days ago about the difference between single vendor events, where it's really one vendor who goes out and what kind of problem do they cause you, versus something that's more systemic and more sort of far-reaching in terms of its impact. And they're just different types of risk. And that's another challenge here. Of course, this is just dynamic and things are changing every day. And so a lot of it is just, do you have visibility on the things that you need to? Do you have steps in place or a process in place to be able to respond if something happens? And another approach is thinking about things like cyber insurance. Like, are there ways that we can sort of manage potential risk by transferring it?
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, because that was my next question on insurance and also how we interact with our suppliers, right? And you mentioned SLAs and creating that accountability. So as we as cyber professionals are entering with agreements with certain vendors, how do you see that relationship evolving, or from a negotiation standpoint saying, hey, really want to do business with you, company A, but I need to understand better your threat landscape. And then if that isn't up to a certain standard, we need to have some sort of insurance agreement that if our data is breached, that there will be some insurance policy. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I think I've seen in working with different companies that have strong third-party risk programs is that one of the things that makes them a strong third-party risk program is that their program has teeth to it, right? They have some way of holding their third parties accountable, and they have clarity on what is expected of that vendor, that third party, that they can carry out. And so I think the ability to actually get contract language around that, get that as part of your relationship or your agreement with them is really critical, because it allows you not just to set the expectation with them up front, which is really healthy and productive, because it allows them to say, okay, here's what I'm working toward. Here is the thing that I need to do to keep up my end of the bargain from a business perspective, and this is what I need to do in order to maintain this relationship with my customer. So I think making sure that there's something in place to really guarantee that there's strength behind the program, that there's an expectation or a policy that's in place to say, here's what we expect of you as our vendor, And I think the other thing that you're seeing with, not to do a shameless plug, but even with BitSight, there are ways that we have to help you support that relationship and make clear that, hey, we're on the same page here. We have the same visibility into, your security performance, and here's how we're going to measure it, which gives it doesn't just give them work to do. It actually empowers them to say, here's how we are measuring ourselves, and here's how we know that we are sort of in line with where we're expected to be. I think the other thing is that from a fourth party perspective, so everything I just said is true from a third party relationship, but you don't have contracts with your fourth parties a lot of the time. And so even in those cases, I think there are ways in contracts to say, here's what we expect for any subcontractors that you're using. And here's the kind of disclosure that we expect if there's something that's new or changing here. And again, BitSight has ways to help sort of identify where there are gaps in what they are sharing or what they're disclosing and what we see. But I think a lot of it is just making sure that you have that sort of shared responsibility over performance, as I said. It really takes a village.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And that's ongoing conversations that we're having with our executive leadership team, the integration of not just cyber security risk, but, other, risk as a whole holistic concept. And I think, we've seen, especially with SolarWinds, that convergence. So I think the future is bright, but also terrifying a little bit. And, but I think there are a lot of opportunities as well. And, if I think about some of the things you discuss in terms of accountability and monitoring and level setting, creating that baseline of understanding between partners, it doesn't have to be adversarial, right? I think particularly with SLAs and things like that, where, I need you to stay here. Again, mutual respect, it's a mutual understanding that helps both sides, or, the larger spectrum grow.
Absolutely. And I think, as you said, it doesn't have to be adversarial. And I think that what we see is that the most effective third-party programs are not adversarial. They're actually very supportive and sharing, they're sharing information, they're sharing what the expectation is, and also, helping support with information and tools to help make sure that there is clarity about what's expected and where something's out of line. And I think from my experience, when third-party programs are sharing information with their vendors, the best vendors of theirs are the ones who are sort of receptive to that information, or who are, appreciative of the information sharing, as opposed to sort of locking down and being defensive, which is, normal and sort of expected. But I think the most productive relationships are where there's that mutual accountability.
Yep. And I think that's a great point to close on. So thank you so much, Vanessa. Really appreciate it. Thank you to Erdal, who, again, unfortunately couldn't make it for the live session. Thank you all who were in attendance for this. I hope it was insightful. Please reach out to the program coordinators if there are any other follow-up questions or comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you.